quickly tell, like first time that I met with the Student Islamic Organization was many years ago. And I had been, when I was in college, also many years ago, in the 80s, before I was a Muslim, I was kind of looking at all the different religions. And on Thursday I would be with the Hindu students, on Friday with the Muslim students, Saturday with the Jews, and then Sunday with the Catholics at Mass. And I was studying many languages. I was studying French, and German, and Latin, and Greek, Arabic, Hebrew, Syriac, Coptic, Ethiopic, and then I went into South Asian languages, Sanskrit and Prakrit and Tamil, and I kept learning all these different languages to read old and sacred texts. And when I was first in, I guess Madras was early or mid 80s. I was studying the poetry of Andal, and then I was studying the Sri Rashya of Ramanujan. And then after that, a few years after that, I was in this International Islamic University. I was one of the 6 faculty who was asked to complete the curriculum for 10 faculties of the IIU. And so we 6 would sit down every day and come up with this great idea of what can we do to make a university. And so we were able to put in all of our ideas about Islam and about politics and everything into this curriculum. And while I was there, I was invited by SIO to come to coaching. And so I flew across to Madras, and somehow we couldn't get, something happened and the plane was delayed or something. But we took one of the little ambassadors and we drove all the way across the country to get to Cochin on time for the lecture. And it was a wonderful experience, and what was so delightful for me was to see that the people with me, when they looked at the subcontinent, when they looked at South India, at Tamil Nadu, and they could see all of the truths that I had seen, they said, as Muslims, we accept these as true. And they could see who the muwahideen, who the people who saw that God is one, and the tawheed of the peoples. And so I was so delighted to see that. And that's really, when I became a Muslim, that was one of the most important things for me, is that as a Muslim, when I entered into Islam, all of the truths that I had had in every other culture and other religion and every other experience were confirmed by Islam, were encompassed by Islam. And so to see SIO to have that kind of attitude was very encouraging for me. And so, let me add that they're also, right now we're in a situation where we have 2 parallel situations going on. One of them seems to be very potentially very disruptive and difficult, and this generation, your generation, is having to deal with this, and that disruption is in this thing called, let's say, social media. When you think about Facebook, it's actually the opposite of social. It's the opposite of political, because it's individualized. No one's Facebook page is the same as anyone else's Facebook page. So everyone becomes a sea of individuals. And a sea of individuals is easy to control. And so empires and corporations are able to control people as long as they are individuals. And so that's a big challenge for people today, is how to handle that kind of control. Because an empire, as Stanley Diamond said, has 2 things. It is exploits abroad and oppresses at home. And right now, the U.S. empire, we see the exploitation abroad. The largest arms sale in human history to Saudi. The largest arms sale in human history to Saudi Arabia. And to do what? To bomb people in Yemen. And to oppress people at home as well. And then the exploitation abroad. The largest grant ever given to another country, given to Israel. It's a 10-year grant that's guaranteed. Even if another president comes in and tries to change the law, the money will still flow to Israel. So this is the kind of exploitation abroad. And then oppression at home. And we've seen more in the U.S., for example, with Black Lives Matter. We've seen people aware of how much oppression is taking place. We have corporations who are making laws that allow them to put people in jail longer so that they get more money. And we have Muslims on an airplane. They say Bismillah or they say Allahu Akbar, and then they are taken off the plane. So we're seeing, exploitation abroad and oppression at home. Now the interesting thing, however, this is the parallel development, is that for the first time, these kinds of ideas are really out there. They're available. They're out there to be heard and to be considered. I remember when I first talked about, and the rest of us, we would talk about empire and the U.S. as an empire, and people would think, "What are you talking about? It's not an empire." Now people are saying, "Yes, it's an empire. We can see it's an empire." And so that's a new thing. So we have this sort of social media issue with all of its challenges, and then we have, but the other side of it is we have a great amount of ideas and concepts that are coming out that are now available and that can be used to further the kinds of goals that we have. So these things are happening. And one of those things that are happening is this concept of science and technology. And that, now let me just quickly say how strange we are. Ibn Arabi, everything I kind of say is based on what Ibn Arabi says, so I'm sorry, I have to preface that first. Translating the Futuhat and Makkiyya for the last 4.5 years. I've got 4,300 pages out published and available, and there are 10,000 pages total, so I'm working on that right now and continuing to work on that. But how strange we are is one of the times when he talks about Mother Earth. And he says how strange we are that we do not listen to the command of God, of Allah Ta'ala to us, that we should thank our parents, thank Allah and thank our parents. And we do not respect the Mother Earth. We do not respect our mother. And he has a long, beautiful passage about respecting the mother, respecting Mother Earth. And one of the things that comes out is that when we talk about science and technology historically has been the most disrespectful of Mother Earth that can be imagined. It's a disrespectful, it's an attempt to control, it's an attempt to exploit, it's an attempt to take things without giving back. So it has been a horrible record, and we'll be looking at a little bit of that today. So Ibn Arabi is very much wants us to remember our mother and to respect our mother. Now, when it comes to science and technology, there is, about 20 or 30 years ago, when I started studying with IIU, International Islamic University in Malaysia, I was reading all of the people like Jacques Ellul, Deschooling Society, Ivan Illich, all these great people who were saying, watch out for the science and technology, look what it's doing to us politically, look what it's doing to us. And so we put that into the curriculum, and it's so nice to see. I meet some of the students who are now professors, and they ask me, what's your cell phone number? I said, I don't have a cell phone number. And he said, of course you don't. And then he will mention one of Neil Postman or Jacques Ellul or any of these great people who are cautioning us about all of these things. So we have for the first time, according to that previous slide about three idiots, this critique of science and technology. Why we mystify science and we make it into a religion. And so that the ability to see science has become a religion is a very helpful ability, and it's something that's happened in the last 10 years very strongly. It's almost mainstream, the idea that there could be a critique of science. Because when we were talking about this in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, no one wanted to hear that there was a critique of science. Science was perfect. Just like science is a religion, and a religion that is perfect. Okay? Used to have the scientific method. Now you have published papers while renaming theory of hypothesis and pretending to use the scientific method. We have, if you've heard about +1 and some others, there's some articles that came out. People would submit fake articles to journals, scientific journals, and they would get published, and they would get accepted, refereed, and published. Fake research, fake articles. You have all of this stuff out there. It's called junk science. It's things that are created in order to publish, created so that a corporation can get a little bit richer, and it's junk science. It's not done with the scientific method. It's very poorly done, and it goes unnoticed and uncriticized. Okay, next. Yeah, this is that bad science. How that they looking at 100 articles randomly selected to find out how many of them are junk, that cannot be reproduced, that were created because corporations paid for the researchers to come up with certain ideas. This is happening all over the place, and it's a very serious thing. It's telling us that the the emperor has no clothes. That science has gone around and saying, look, we have the scientific method, we're objective, we know everything, and religion and spirituality, these things are nothing. It's actually coming out now that science is shown to be the handmaiden of corporation. So where to next? Okay, next page. Yeah, and some of these revolutions that we were talking about in the 60s and 70s, near where I live in New Mexico, there's a town called Mora, and you had a lot of people going off the grid. They knew that something wrong with science and technology, that it was distracting them from the goals of life that should be there. And so they wanted to get back to the earth, get back to nature, and do these things. And so they made a lot of efforts. This is also the time when Darul Islam was made in Abiquiu, New Mexico, as well. And this was to go off of the grid, to be apart from the city, and to create a place where you could have an Islamic community. The reasons that these things fail is because they don't have a deep cultural foundation. And without a deep cultural foundation, they're very much like an island. They're very much like an island in the middle of the ocean. And it's very difficult to survive when they're not getting energy from what's around them, when they're trying to reject everything that's around them. In China, you have the so-called barefoot doctors, and people like Ivan Illich were writing that 90% of all medicine can be done by laymen, that all you need to do is train people how to handle these kinds of things, and it can be done, and we can have a healthy society, and this is very true, but it's one that that medicine and science wants us to reject. So those are previous revolutions. And back to the idea of technology is, again, you have the counter movement, the idea that part of what we need to do as technology is actually a kind of technology that is simple, it's individual, it's something that a society can use, and it's one that is helpful. This is what's called beneficial knowledge, as they say. Islam has the concept of beneficial knowledge. That is, it benefits people. And the benefit of people means that we don't get caught up into buying products, importing products from abroad, enriching people who are enslaving us. So this is the whole movement of the Swaraj and the whole movement of that. And this one you might not recognize him as Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was I just found out myself, I mean, you probably already know it, he was a great left thinker. He was always denied U.S. citizenship because the FBI kept wanting to arrest him because they did not like the way he supported laborers, he supported the worker, he supported the poor, he was against racism and institutionalized racism. He was actually quite interesting and very powerful thinker and a wonderful person. And this whole idea about beneficial knowledge, what things benefit us. It's very interesting if you look at the case of Kerala that you have a lifespan which is very high, a very high health rate, which the U.S. has slightly more 1 year older people have a median age of one year older. However, it takes 20 times more money to get that. So actually the example of how healthcare should come about is that it should become at a local level, it should become at a community-based level, and that it's quite possible for communities to become healthy, and they don't need to spend huge amounts of money with invasive medical techniques to try to stop these things. So, and health then means primarily food and a lack of toxins in the environment. So when you have all of those things coming together, things start happening for the good. So looking at alternatives here, John Trudell is one of the. He died last year. He used to live part of the time in Las Vegas, New Mexico, where I'm from. He was with the American Indian Movement, AIM movement, and he was very clear that what was happening in society with capitalism and consumerism, that they were progressing through guilt and shame and blame. So you blame everyone else for your problems, and you're ashamed of admitting the problems that you have, and then you feel guilty for all the things that you're doing. He says, take those three things, and that, he says, basically is Western civilization. And he was a very strong poet and speaker who was going against these kinds of ideas, trying to help us rediscover what it is to be human. And he said, I want to be a human being, not a human doing, always having to do. Thanks. So this idea of fitra and ummi, it's very interesting, the idea of ummi, because when Ibn Arabi uses the word ummi, he really means the state you are when you come from your mother. And so, of course, that is the description also of our Prophet ﷺ, that he is ummi, which should be understood as the state as coming from your mother, which means you've come from Alastu bi Rabbikum qalu bala, and you've come down through the cosmos into the womb, and when you leave the womb of your mother, you look back at the mother in thankfulness and respect. And that is the state that we need to be in. That is the ummi state. And so the ummi state is the one which allows us to see that we are part and we are connected, and we are thank Allah and thank our parents, which was Luqman's advice. So that's the concept of ummi. I live just about a little bit in front of this hill here, somewhere around there. This is John Trudell. I put this here because he's one of the very few people who speak so clearly about what's happening. When I'm working with Ibn Arabi, I'm translating Ibn Arabi's Futuhat and Makkiyya. I find it's very easy to see that how clear and clarifying his words are, his ideas are. And it's very rare to find people today who can speak with that kind of clarity. And this is the Arabi Mubin. And the Arabi Mubin is the one that clarifies, that separates things so you see where things are and tells you what's what, makes things coherent for us. And that's a very important concept, because what it says is that we are besieged by so many influences, so many ideas, and so many technologies that we use without understanding how we're using them. We don't understand what the effect they're having on us. Do we know what effect a blue screen has on you at 9 o'clock, at 10 o'clock at night? The effect it has actually is it prevents you from falling into sleep very quickly. And this is something you probably won't recognize, you won't understand. Teenagers especially have trouble falling asleep. They end up staying up very late because they don't feel tired. But by the time they feel tired, they're already 2 hours past when they should have been sleeping. I started a school with my mother in New Mexico, and we high school, and then we started the school at 9 o'clock because people need to sleep a little bit longer. And 8 o'clock was too early, or 7:30 was too early. And that's because, especially with teenage brains, their technologies affect us without knowing how they're affecting us. So this clarifying thinking is very important, because it tells us what's happening to our lives in a way that we're not trained to look at. And one of those concepts, when I was asked to do something on sustainability, this idea of sustainability for UNESCO. And of course, I work with Ibn Arabi, and I looked at what Ibn Arabi says about sustainability and things like that. And it became very clear that the whole idea of sustainability, and much of the green revolutions or the eco movements and things, are ones that are saying we're going to exploit the Mother Earth, but we'll exploit in a sustainable way. And for Ibn Arabi, that's illegitimate. That's not allowable. You cannot exploit your mother, period. You can't say, I'm going to exploit my mother, but only a little bit and only enough to sustain her. It can't be that way. That's not our relationship to the earth. That's not our relationship to the divine. And so I looked at this concept. I started from a concept from Ursula Le Guin, who wrote about this walking away from Omelas. And it's a very interesting story. The premise is that there's a little child that's in a basement somewhere. And that child can never leave the basement, is chained up, tied up, fed just enough to survive. But because that child is there, the whole society, the whole community flourishes. So as long as that child is locked up in the basement, one child, the rest of the community can be a very prosperous, flourishing community. So Ursula Le Guin writes this story. She's asking, what kind of deal is that? Because there are some people who walk away from Omelaks. They walk away and they say, I can't live in a society which exploits this small child in this basement room. And they walk away. They won't accept it. The rest of the society says, well, we're doing really well, and after all, it's only one child that we're exploiting. So when I looked at Ibn Arabi's idea of Mother Earth and exploitation, and I could see that there is no exploitation that is acceptable. And there is no small child, just one child, that will give us all these wonderful things and that's acceptable. It's not. We have to walk away from that. And so the sustainability, if it means how can we keep the earth alive just enough so that we can continue to exploit her, that's unacceptable. And so we need, if the moment you have that clarifying, that Arabi Mubin from Ibn Arabi, for instance, you'll be able to take that and see no exploitation is correct. The only relationship we have to the earth is to our mother, which is one of thankfulness and gratitude. And that we are sustained by Allah Ta'ala, and we are not sustained by, let's ignore the God and ignore divinity and all of that and just grab what we can while we can, as long as it lasts. So it gives us a very different perspective about how we should be towards Earth. And of course the tree hugging movement. Right now in the US we have the idea of fracking. Fracking is when they push chemicals and high pressure hydraulics into the earth to make it shake enough so that a little tiny bit of shale oil will come out of it. And so, and it's often said quite clearly, you've got fracking or you've got water. So which do you want to have? Do you want to have oil or do you want to have water? Because you have to make the choice. And if you are fracking in an area, there will be no water that can be drunk from that area. And it's always kind of strange to hear that could be actually an argument. I wonder, should I have fracking in oil or should we have water? And it's like, I don't see how that could be a choice. It's like, how can that be a choice? It is no choice. There is only one way. We need the water. And so we cannot accept that water gets polluted, because if there is no water to drink, then one day we all start dying. And so this is the value of water, the thankfulness that we have for having water provided, and we do not exploit anything that will cause water to be harmed. Now with Ibn Arabi, I was saying that well, we're in a very interesting situation right now when it comes to the Futuhat Makkiyya, for instance. The Futuhat Makkiyya is 10,000 pages. It's in 3 manuscripts, and each of those manuscripts has Ibn Arabi writing much of it, or signing to every juz. He'll sign and say, this is Ibn Arabi, it's my work, and it has been copied correctly. So we have manuscripts in Sheikh al-Akbar's own handwriting. And these texts have come down now through 800 years. For 800 years, these texts have come down. The Futuhat al-Makkiyya has never been translated. There's a Turkish version of it, there's some Urdu of it, but it's basically never been translated. And the first translation, the most that has ever been translated is about 1% until today. Right now, I have about 43% of the Futuhat translated. People are telling me from around the world that they need this English translation to understand the Arabic. And so it's almost like an Arabic commentary of the Arabic original. Because when you read the Futuhat al-Makkiyya, anyone who's familiar with it will tell you, you can know every word but have no idea what he's saying. And that's because you really need to have a commentary. And this is the first commentary and translation of the Futuhat al-Makkiyya. It's waited for 800 years. No one before this has ever made a translation. And as I tell people that if you look at universities, my colleagues in universities, they get one book of 300 pages every 2 or 3 years. They're happy. My output is about 1,500 pages, 1,500 pages a year. So I do that. I do nothing but translate. And so I tell people, if I don't get to continue, it's not going to happen. So this is a very unusual and special time, and I think the reason it's special is because Ibn Arabi talked to his group around him, and very many times he said, learn this, but if you don't understand it, then go on khalwat, go on retreat, and one day maybe Allah will tell you. Until then, keep reading, keep trying. And so you could tell that he was throwing out ideas and numbers and ratios that no one knew what he really was talking about. He says that the darajat of shukr is 520, but why that should mean, why the abjad should have anything to do with shukr. And he'll explain the darajat of shukr, he'll explain the darajat of all of these ahwal, and you're wondering, where does this come from, what does it all mean? So I've been working a lot on that, and one of the things I've noticed is that as I'm working in the new sciences, I'm able to understand something about the Futuhat al-Makkiyya. He talks about fractals. Fractals is a very important concept, and he talks about that. He talks about geometries, which are non-commutative geometries. That non-commutative geometries, A times B is not the same as B times A. And if you think about, you're putting your socks on and then your shoes is not the same thing as putting your shoes and then your socks. So that is a non-commutative situation. And Ibn Arabi is talking about non-commutative geometries. And it's only in the 20th century has this come out, and especially the Frenchman Alain Cohn has come up with the idea of exploring this non-commutative geometry. And so many of these ideas that have come out in the last 100 years or 50 years or 20 years are helping us understand the Futuhat al-Makkiyya. And so one has the feeling that this text has sat there. Certain people have understood it throughout the ages, but it has sat there and made descriptions of how the earth will be flattened in a ratio of 13 to 99. What kind of ratio is 13 to 99? And where does that come from? And what it comes from is understanding as a fractal dimension. He talks about Junaid sneezing, and someone says, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, and then someone says, how can you put Alhamdulillah next to Rabbil Alameen when one is the Khalq, the Alameen, and one is the Khaliq, the Rabb? And so, how are you putting those two together? And Junaid says, no problem. When you take the old and it hits the new, then you never see anything of the new, but you only see the old slips to the side, the new comes to the front. And then he says, when you multiply one alif by another alif, sometimes it will equal one, sometimes it will equal something else. When the first one will be on the surface and the other one will be underneath. And you think, what kind of mathematics is this? Well, the kind of mathematics is vector multiplication. Because Ibn Arabi many times said that alif and ba, these are not one-dimensional or zero-dimensional letters. These are three-dimensional letters. So when you multiply three-dimensional volume to another three-dimensional volume, you get a six-dimensional hypervolume. So Ibn Arabi is talking about six-dimensional hypervolumes back 800 years ago. And the mathematics of hyperdimensions is only something that's happened in maybe the last 50, 60 years or so. He talks about imaginary numbers. He talks about the square roots of equaling -1. He said, where does all this come from? How does he know this? What does he see? And so the kind of mathematics that we have today is able to look, I can take that language and be able to understand how the Futuhat al-Makkiyya is working. One of those is, the latest here is, one thing that's come out also from France is the idea of pilot waves. And they took this, you take a viscous oil and a ball bouncing on it. And it turns out that as the ball bounces, it is guided by a wave, a pilot wave. And the pilot wave idea was one that David Bohm came up with, Bohmian mechanics. And that was the idea that, that when you have a double slit experiment, you have to say, is a particle a wave or a particle? And if you look at it one way, it's a wave. If you look at it another way, it's a particle. It's the dual concept of matter. And so David Bohm said, actually, there is a real quantum mechanics, and that is that there's a pilot wave. So every particle has a wave, every wave has its particle. And so you have to see the pilot wave, the wave and the particle working together. And this is called Bohmian mechanics. And one of his ideas that he comes up with this idea is that once you have a wave, the entire universe is covered by a wave. And so you have a WDE, you have a wave equation that covers the entire universe. So that means that everything is connected from one end of the universe to the other. So if everything is connected, then the distinction between local and non-local disappears. And David Bohm was big on that. Ibn Arabi is forever telling us that all things are connected in a way that one thing happens here and another thing happens there, and they are connected. And you can never tell what is most, things that are directly connected are not necessarily the most influential. So this is part of Bohmian mechanics. He also talks about the implicate order, that implied or implicate folded within all reality is the code for the next piece of reality. So that every event that we have has inside, folded inside, the next event. And Ibn Arabi uses the word tayya, and tayya is a fold. And that when something is folded, he says, that's how the awliya can go to one place and be in another place at the same time. That's like the abdal, that you see them in one place, and then they are substituting in another place. So the abdal can be in two places at once. They can be superpositioned. So if they're superpositioned, that's because they are in a folded reality. So David Bohm talks about the implicate reality, the folded reality. Ibn Arabi talks about the tayya, this idea of folding. Okay. Next. Okay. And then the idea of how things come together. That the arwah, the spirits, are like army forces. The ones that are close to each other know each other and they agree with each other. They're harmonious. The ones that are far apart, they disagree with each other. They're unharmonious. And so this concept of the arwah and where they are in the clay, because Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Abu Bakr and he were clay brothers, that they were from the same clay. And so that idea of from the same clay tells us who of us gets along. And that's why you can meet someone on the other side of the world and suddenly you have a connection, you know each other so well, you can finish each other's sentences. It's because you are clay brothers. You come from the same clay. Okay? He talks about one thing, a standing wave. He talks about the way the angels meet the person. The person is met by the angel. When the angel meets the person is receptive, the angel will go back in a reverse way. When the person is asleep or not receptive, the angel comes back in this kind of wave. And it turns out these are waves that are flexible nodes or inflexible nodes. And so he talks about inverse, converse, and reverse. And I spent months on this passage trying to understand reverse, inverse, and converse waves until I came to understand that there's something called a flexible node. And when a wave comes like this, and it's a flexible node, it bounces back the same way it came. If it's unflexible, it reverses and comes back upside down. This one's not moving. This is a gift of the Clifford Torus. Ibn Arabi says that when you look at every center point goes out through the circumference. So you have a center point going out through the circumference. And as you see, this is in a sense making pizza-shaped slices, right? Making these triangles. And Ibn Arabi says these might be triangles, that every center point goes through a circumference point. And yet each line from center to circumference, center to circumference, center to circumference is parallel. And you think, how can those lines be parallel? Because if you have a circle and you have a dot in the middle, these are triangles, or pizza slices, they're triangles. And Ibn Arabi says, no, they're parallel. And he doesn't know why they are, but he says they're parallel. Well, the Clifford Torus, in 4 dimensions, as it rotates, it has these center points going to the circumference, which go from triangles to parallel and back to triangles. So he saw something that was only described in the 19th century mathematically as a hypertorus, as a toroid movement, where you have parallel lines that do meet. And this is, of course, non-Euclidean geometry. Non-Euclidean geometry. Ibn Arabi says that if you take a point and a second point, you make a line. You take one line, a second line, you make a plane. You take one plane, a second plane, you make a volume. I said the next one is an 8-dimensional figure. So you have the Zat in the middle, and then you have the 7 Sifat on the outside. This makes an 8-dimensional hyperpolygon. So that makes an 8-dimensional figure. Okay. And this 8-dimensional figure becomes very, very important. You have to go back to what's called Pascal's triangle. It's actually not Pascal's triangle. It was the Chinese knew it, India knew it, the Arab world knew it, and then the French get the credit for it. That's how things go. But the Pascal triangle is 1, and then 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 3, 3, 1, 1, 4, 6, 4, 1, 1, 5, 10, 10, 5, 1, etc. You go all the way down, you get to 8, and you get some very interesting numbers starting to come out because you get the 28 letters of the alphabet, of the alphabet. Okay. And this is one I was saying that how strange we are that we haven't stopped to attend to what God commanded, to obey Him and honor our parents. This is, of course, Luqman's advice to his son was that thank Allah and thank your parents. And we haven't been harmonious with her, nor have we given fully to what we saw of the virtues of this mother and her affection towards us and her love. When the Prophet ﷺ said, this world is a vehicle blessing the faithful, moving. On her they reach the fullness of good, and by her they escape from bad. He described her as powerful vigilance over her children, as reminding them about the bad things and helping them escape them, and making the good seem more beautiful to them, and making them passionate for good. Thus she takes them on a journey, and she carries them from a place of badness to a place of good. And that is due to the intensity of her watchful overseeing what God sent down to her of divine commands called laws. She loves that her children establish the laws so that they may be felicitous. And this one, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had described her with the finest of qualities, and he deemed her to be a place for the good things. Thus, for the people of watchful awareness, muraqabah, it is appropriate that their commencement in the entrance to this world through the womb of their mother should focus on acquiring these qualities, that they will be aware and watchful of the states of their mother. Indeed, when infants open their eyes, it is only to their mother, and they see only her. Thus they love her instinctively, and they lean to her more affectionately than they lean towards their father, because they are aware only of the one who cherishes them, and it is appropriate then that they emulate her behaviors. When he's talking about muraqabah, Ibn Arabi talks about the raqib, and he had a dream when the Prophet ﷺ said, do you know what the raqib is? And Ibn Arabi said, yes, I know what the raqib is. He said, then do mention it. And so he mentions this idea of the raqib is someone, for instance, an aunt who doesn't have a child of her own is very watchful and has a lot of muraqabah, has a lot of awareness of her brother's children. So she's raqib. She doesn't have children of her own. She's aware of these other children and takes care of them and watches them very carefully because she hopes for the best for them. And he says, look at what happens with Mother Earth. The Mother Earth is the first wife, and the second wife is the Akhirah. And the Akhirah is the second wife who's trying to get the children to come towards her. So the Akhirah says, look how beautiful I am. I have gardens for you. I have the Jannat. I have all these beautiful gardens waiting for you. And come to the Akhirah, and you'll have all these great rewards, great foods, and great gardens to walk along, huge trees and rivers flowing underneath. And so the second wife is trying to bring the children over to her and make them leave the first wife, the Mother Earth, the dunya. And so Ibn Arabi has a passion plea because, of course, as most Sufis, he's always talking about Akhirah and doesn't talk very much about dunya. But here he starts talking about dunya. So this is the first wife. This is your mother. And don't be distracted by all the beauties of the Akhirah, but instead concentrate on the beauties here, because everything in the Akhirah is actually here. Every beautiful flavor and beautiful taste is actually in the dunya. And every wonderful garden is actually in the dunya. And all the 4 rivers here flow to the Akhirah. And there is a place, there is a rauda between the pulpit and the masjid, which is one of the rauda of the Jannah. And so Ibn Arabi has a beautiful passage describing the beauties of the world and the beauties of the Mother Earth. Okay?
Yeah. That's, yeah, that won't be here right now. And another passage that I was working on in 2012 was also very, difficult for me to work with because it was trying to understand it. He was talking about these lataif, these very nigh invisible, subtle beings. He says, which have an amanat. And their amanat, they live inside you, they live in your stomach. And their amanat is if you eat something that is bad, it makes you vomit or burp or burp. And if you eat something that's good, their amanat is to digest it and make you urinate or defecate it in the end. And so Ibn Arabi says they have an amanat, and they are the ones that are determining for you your physical health and your spiritual health and your relation with haqq. And so about in 2010, some Swiss scholars and some other people started finding out about gut bacteria or the gut flora. And they were finding out that there are billions and billions of little creatures, and they are in the intestine, and they precisely, if you eat something that's bad, they will see that and they will throw it back out. If they see something good, they will digest it for you. And that based on your gut bacteria, you can predict someone's physical health and their mental health. Of course, they don't talk about their health with haqq, but they talked about physical health and mental health. And I thought this was absolutely fascinating because I'm sure when Ibn Arabi talked about these little creatures with their amanat, I'm sure people thought, what the heck is this guy talking about? It's only within now 6 years that people have said,